Life is something more than a molecule and more than a mineral. Life is a complicated collection of molecules, always on Earth, in the form of a cell. So all of life, its base unit is a cell. For most of life, for most organisms of life, that's the whole unit. There's nothing on top of that. Here are the three basic types of life. They're bacteria, archaea, and eukarya. But these three forms are not necessarily fundamental. We consider them fundamental right now, and they are different in kind, and all of life lines up according to these differences into these three categories. But because we don't really know the details of early life, really early life, before even the earliest born thing on this evolutionary diagram, we don't know what that's made of. And we don't know exactly how that worked. And because we categorize life by looking at ancestors rather than traits, and we're trying to categorize them given their evolutionary categories, we sometimes can't do that very well. But we do follow genetic evidence, and that's how we get these three categories of bacteria, archaea, and eukarya. So what are these categories? On a very basic level, bacteria and archaea are all composed of single-celled organisms. These cells are less sophisticated than eukarya. They're also smaller than eukarya. Eukaryotic cells have much more structure inside them. So, for example, even though bacteria and archaea will have genetic information, inside that genetic information will be loose and exposed to the rest of the cell inside the cell. But in eukarya, that will be contained within a nucleus. It will have a membrane and it will be sealed up and secure in there. So the basic two distinctions between bacteria and archaea and eukarya are the size and the structure. And eukarya, we find all multicellular organisms, which are most of what we conventionally think of as life. Okay, so these are the forms that life takes, but what are the characteristics of life? What makes these things life? And what makes these things life is that they all have these characteristics. They grow and develop, they metabolize, that is that they take in energy and they process that energy, they excrete that energy, they use that energy. They have some way of maintaining a controlled internal environment, and that's referred to as homeostasis. They're able to adapt through mutation and natural selection. They respond to stimuli in some form. They respond to the things that are happening around them and to them. They're all composed of cells, and they all reproduce. They all have genetic material. All of them contain both DNA and RNA, which again speaks to the fact that we don't really have a good sense of the first life. That's a basic sense of what life is organized in some way, it contains DNA and RNA, it reproduces, not necessarily in the same way though. Different ways of life could reproduce in different ways. And if you have that, well, you're life. And what are the three things that have that? Well, there are actually three basic cell types. One's a bacterial cell type, one's an archaea cell type, and one's a eukaryotic cell type. And we're going to start exploring cells in more depth in the next video.